it's one thing to talk about it in an annual report or to say externally that you're prioritizing cybersecurity. It's another thing to empower the teams and make sure the teams have the support they need to actually do it on a day-to-day basis. Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, welcome. My name is Craig Duckworth. And today with me, we have LuRae Lumpkin, who is an industrial cybersecurity communications expert. Welcome to the show, LuRae. How about a little background history on where you've been, what you've done, and how you got to be where you are today?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. I am happy to be here and have spent the majority of my career in B2B communications, marketing, et cetera. Had some earlier experience with B2C, business to consumer, but the business to business space is a unique area because you have to bridge the gap between business speak and making it simple enough for people to grasp from the businesses you're dealing with all the way to the board.
Good. Well, welcome. So let's just dive right in. A couple things is you've had the opportunity to work with organizations across many verticals and many industries. Mm-hmm. As you look at the evolution of the physical cyber systems that we deal with every day, how are you seeing the communication methods change and the response from organizations of what's effective and what's not effective?
Yes. I know that IT has had a 20-year head start on the OT space. Mm-hmm. And so I think the evolution of the communication has really driven the realization that there's a different language that's spoken between IT and OT. The words that we use to communicate the message to internal organizations, whether it's the plant floor people or the C-suite, they hear the message differently.
True.
And all of the assumptions, I think, seen that there's now an understanding that IT doesn't know everything, even though they've been kind of put in charge. They don't know the plant floor the way the operations team does. So bridging that communication, I think everyone has started creating case studies and annual reports and interviewing companies to document what's really happening. The fact that 80% of the OT breaches typically start on the IT side with some kind of system intrusion. All of those things have had to be communicated. And now there's more receptivity, I think, which is just like your podcast, encouraging people to educate themselves on industrial cybersecurity. What does that mean? What don't we know that we should know? Your tagline, which is perfect.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that you're right. The message, and we see that from somebody that's in the trenches every day. When we are presenting to C-suite board, it's a different message than when we're speaking to the controls engineer, a plant manager that's tasked differently. The C-suite, obviously, based on their role, the board based on their role, their overall directive is enterprise-wide, looking at risk, looking at large future-looking facing objectives. And the plant, the engineers, the asset owners, which a lot of times we will reference, are tasked with doing the work, performing the task. What tools make sense? How does the tool interact? What does it do? You're 1,000% correct. And we see the same thing on our side. That message has to be different.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So as you work with organizations to craft that message, are you seeing a shift? Are some organizations moving as quick? You mentioned the 20-year head start. Mm-hmm. What do we need to do? How is it different today than where it was 5, 6, 7 years ago?
I would say that the breaches that have occurred, and I'm top of mind with the SEC ruling for privately held companies that have a breach. So I think everything from going back to the Colonial Pipeline to the Oldsmar water breach, those events caused a wake up. And it was like, wake up, people, because they're coming for you. And I say some of the events, obviously, as you know, cyber events are triggered by internal human error much of the time. But there are, in the geopolitical environment we're in, we know critical infrastructure and gas, water, electricity, all of those are at risk because that can jeopardize, obviously, our nation, our country. So I think that over time, the fact that companies have been breached, it has caused a wake-up call, because if you look at the impacts of like stock price and brand perception when there's an event, and when you think of companies using plausible deniability, like we knew.
Don't tell me I can't know.
Exactly. Like we asked the questions and they said we were covered. And it's like, words are cheap. Actions speak louder than words.
Yeah. And I would say, and I don't know if you handle this one kind of in dealing with part of your communication, we see the messaging different pre-breach and post-breach. Typically what we see, and maybe this is different from a communications expert like yourself versus what we see in the industry, is it's pre-breaches education, information, helping them understand the why do they need to do something. Post-breach, we see attorneys, NDAs, cloak and dagger, and nobody says anything. From a communication standpoint, are there differences that you guys would walk through? How would that work from your side?
Yeah, I think that we're always beating the drum of be proactive, not reactive, because once you have a breach, then it's all hands on deck. We need to do something. We need a cybersecurity solution for the plant floor. We thought IT had it covered. It is a lot of times, I think it's a lot of finger pointing, and from a communication standpoint, making sure there's damage control, especially if it's a company that is external facing, where there are customers who are going to be impacted once an announcement is made. All of those dynamics play into what is communicated, and internally, it's I think a rallying of how do we do damage control? And then what can we do to prevent this from happening at another location? But it seems like people are kind of head in the sand, like an ostrich, like, oh, it's not going to happen to us. I have learned the taglines now, like we're air gapped, we've got a firewall, all those things that really mean nothing in the sense of really being cyber safe, cyber secure on a plant floor, critical infrastructure, any of those key areas that our country and as human beings that we rely on.
Yeah, you're spot on. You never want to be trying to build procedures, build processes in the middle of putting out a fire. That's always, when the worst time to develop protocol and procedures and a system is when you're in the middle of an event or a breach or whatever you want to classify it based on terminology.
Right. Absolutely.
So are there certain items, certain tasks that organizations need to be looking at to get the message out? Or how would you say that they should be proactive in preventing? Are there certain key aspects that you think would be important for them?
Well, I think any company, I'll start with like publicly traded companies, like cybersecurity, especially if they're an organization that's a manufacturing, critical infrastructure, any of those verticals, they need to be starting to think from the top down also, and bottoms up. So from a board perspective, from their annual report, like their company vision, their values, what do they say about the importance of cybersecurity and what kind of values do they have around that? Because unless that comes from the top down, it won't be a priority. I always use that analogy. You can't expect what you don't inspect. The communications from the top and the board knowing the right questions to ask, and the C-suite having answers, but asking and going to the plant floor, understanding what is really happening. Don't just take the first answer they get. That is really key. And the OT and the IT teams talking to each other and understanding each other, because they're, that analogy of cats and dogs, like talking different languages. They're both animals, but they're just different creatures.
Yeah. Well, and we see this as well. Organizations from the top down, at the board level, at the C-suite level, conversations around risk, around cyber hygiene, around posture are absolutely taking place. Those are
Right.
large corporate initiatives. I don't care what size the organization is, public or private, 50 million or 50 billion, those conversations are being had. Is there a role that you feel marketing, communication plays that they need that helps them with that? How do they position, let's call it, themselves as being a thought leader or messaging of we are taking cyber seriously? How the organization do you see that rolling up?
Part of it, I think, from a communications standpoint, which is where a marketing and a communications role comes in, you can bridge the gap between both organizations to help make sure the questions that should be asked are being asked. And then, as I had said, like communicating that throughout the organization, like just as IT has data safety as their focal point, the OT side has like production and plant security as their focal point. But communications people can bridge that gap and help both sides see why it's important that they're talking and that there's a common language and that the company overall embrace that. If they can externally, and it's some value to them as a company and their brand perception to say, I think of like the rail industry or any of the critical infrastructure, for them to say, we are making cybersecurity a number one priority. And I saw a research report from Cisco just recently, and they're saying, that is one of the focal points for companies is making it a priority, but expressing that, as I said, like through their annual report, any kind of external advertising communication, any kind of position papers that they do, they should be saying that because it's important that companies know.
Well, I would step back from that one step and I would say, yes, if I were to read 10 annual reports, 10 of them are going to say cybersecurity is important to us. However, if I were to go into the organization and I were to talk to the frontline people, the task doers, would they say, yes, our culture is cybersecurity is important to us? Or would they say, we say that, but nothing really happens. We are not walking the walk. Part of that communication should be, are they practicing what they preach?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that is where the big disconnect can be, because obviously with Gartner saying, the C-suite is going to be held accountable. So they're asking the questions, like check the box, I ask the question, but then down to the plant floor with shortages of talent, with people who don't really even understand maybe what has been installed. Maybe there's a cybersecurity solution that's been installed, whether it's Clarity or whoever, and having somebody outside the organization be able to come in and help them make sense of it and operationalize it. You do, in your work, that is what really needs to happen. So you're right. It's one thing to talk about it in an annual report or to say externally that you're prioritizing cybersecurity. It's another thing to empower the teams and make sure the teams have the support they need to actually do it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. And we run across organizations that truly are walking the walk. And you can tell when you converse with them that their message to their team is, we're not just saying this, we are believing this from the top down. We are practicing this in the board, at our C-suite meetings. This is something that we have empowered our team to do, no different than safety. Safety is a priority on the plant floor. Digital safety is becoming a priority on the plant floor as well. And it goes back to messaging. How is the organization presenting that externally and internally? It's important. That's a critical piece.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So are there ways that an organization should look at positioning to better themselves within peer-to-peer communication to set themselves apart from competitors. How would you advise, or what would your recommendation to an organization be if they're looking to try and to do that?
Well, I think everyone comes from the vantage point of like, what's in it for me? So if there's a value, obviously, whether it's, as I said before, brand perception or value to the external market for them to be speaking to, we're cyber aware, we're cyber defensive. We've taken the steps to ensure that everything that we do has cybersecurity in mind. Those are external things. Again, I'm just really conscious of the fact that the internal organizations, when they're communicating with their employees and with the internal communication that they're doing, they have to have everything in place to support them doing that. So it's one thing, as we said, to say it, and another to actually do it. But saying that they're conscious of it and making that front and center one of their corporate values or one of their operational values, it needs to be bumped up in the priorities to make sure it actually is done.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I would say part of the difficulty definitely from my standpoint, because I don't always wordsmith things perfectly, and I don't always put them in the nice, pretty, fluffy things that way that people understand them, to distinguish and determine how to bridge that gap, as you mentioned, to take what's important and digest what the vendors, we work with a lot of different vendors in this space. They all have their own marketecture, as we like to call it, of what their tool or technology does and how that should be communicated and digested and interpreted from an organizational standpoint. Do you help organizations with that as well?
Yes. And I think being able to simplify the complex and I'll say dumb it down so that, it's almost like you have to write at a 7th grade level so that it's the words, we're not out to, I'm very much like anti-corporate speak, like unpacking something like, am I going on vacation? Like, I don't use that vernacular. It's like, talk in simple language that is common to everyone. That way you minimize the risk of trying to sound fancy, trying to, you minimize missing the mark, because you have to speak in a way that almost anyone can understand. I mean, I didn't have a cybersecurity background like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I mean, I've worked in the B2B space, but, say McAfee was a client, and I was agency side. So that was kind of my initial foray into just risk and protecting data, protecting yourself. But you have to speak in a language that is common, both sides can understand, and not try to one up by sounding fancy or smarter than using language that no one understands. That doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, no, I would say very smart. I like that idea. As we kind of look at the evolution, we are, I would say 8, maybe 10 years into OT, cyber, operational technology, cyber physical systems, protecting this on this journey. Obviously, each organization across the industry and verticals are all at different stages. Have you seen a shift? How has the messaging, how has the communication been in that 5 or 6 years that you've been doing this? What are you seeing?
It's gone from are you doing something, or you should be doing something, to more helping them be efficient in doing something. So there is, in the marketing speak, there is the funnel of unaware to being aware to needing to do something to being ready to do something. And so we really speak to all parts of that funnel depending on what the initiative is that we're doing. The more close we are to someone taking action, is it's going to be more of an email kind of message. It's much more direct versus speaking more at the higher level. But because there have been so many incidents of breaches that have occurred and like the government, the SEC stepping in and saying, you
Yeah.
need to alert if something has happened because people need to know. And you look at the CrowdStrike event. I mean, when things are making the news like that, it then becomes front and center like, whoa, we don't want that to happen to us because it'll affect their stock price and their perception externally, right?
Yeah. And I look at that and I'm like, I get it and I understand it and I know why it's there, but I see through the architecture and the loopholes of what's material and what is a incident, what is a breach, and the terminology, depending on the particular word that is written or spoken, has a different meaning, context. And that's where you, other market communication specialists, help organizations understand the way that plays out.
Right. Absolutely.
So if we're kind of winding down a little bit, if from an advice standpoint, if you could look at an organization and say, here's some advice of what you should be doing or how you should be communicating, what would be a takeaway that someone listening today could really leverage?
I would say, look at how you are speaking about like cybersecurity or cybersecurity solutions. Are you involving it in your, a culture of being cyber aware is something that should be woven into from HR as well. I mean, so it's looking across the organization. How much is this a part of our culture? Because the issues that we're having with breaches and just the complexity of remote access, and we didn't touch on this, like warranties where you've got foreign companies that are accessing equipment on the plant floor because the warranty is null if they don't allow remote access. So making sure that communication is happening across the organization, and that is key. And just getting started and making sure you've got a cybersecurity plan in place. And if you don't have the expertise in-house, get it. Engage someone like you guys. Have someone who's walked the walk and isn't just talking about it, but doing it.
Yeah, no, and you bring up a great point on the remote access. We see that, and that it kind of brings me back to a messaging. We are dealing with that today where we provide services to an organization, both from a controls doing the work and from a vendor standpoint. And remote access into their environment is something that we do. And they are asking us to use a different form of remote access into it. So let's say organization A has a plant and they've got machines on it, they've got processes on it, and each of their OEMs or their vendors that have that remote access into that environment are using different methods, whether that is a VPN, that is a OT-centric secure remote access tool, that is a jump box related to an OT environment. As these organizations come in, how would an organization choose to communicate to their vendors that this is now our new standard? This is something we're doing. How would you position something like that to make it more OT operational centric so that it does protect us versus, letting everybody choose what they want to do?
Right. Yeah. It's almost like part of either winning the business or being part of their business. It's a matter of having a consistent message that says, we value cybersecurity and we value our relationship with you. And as a result, this is how we engage with external partners. These are the protocols that we need. And you honestly need, I'm not an attorney, but you need them to agree that they will comply with those guidelines to continue the relationship and ensure that everyone's safe. I mean, I go back to, it's always what's in it for me. So what's the benefit to them? It's like securing them, ensuring that the service they're providing is going to be rock solid with the company that they're engaged with to support them.
I think the messaging, regardless of which way you look at it, is effective communication that the audience understands in a language that they understand, and
Right.
effectively communicating that the message across is really critical.
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Great conversation, LuRae. It's always good to speak to you. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. And make sure that as you help organizations, they realize that it's not about just doing something, it's about how you communicate what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.